Navigating your financial plan is a little bit like trying to navigate a long-distance road trip. There are oftentimes slight adjustments that need to be made, but sometimes there are big adjustments that need to be made. And today we'll talk about how to update the plan over time.
You know, Spencer, as we think about the financial planning process, we started this whole video series with a video called The Importance of Knowing Where You're Going.
Right.
And the reality is financial planning is a lot like the road trip you alluded to. Mm-hmm. There is a destination in mind. None of us is going to live forever. Right. And so when we think about our finances, we have to think about what are those goals. And just like a road trip, sometimes bathroom breaks happen. Sometimes Chick-fil-A is closed. Every week on Sunday, Chick-fil-A is closed. And so my kids aren't going to be able to get their favorite chicken sandwich. But the financial planning process is a lot like that. Maybe sometimes clients want to work a little bit longer. Maybe they have a grandchild that's born. And so there's always changes that need to be made. So as you think about why it's important to come back to your financial plan over and over and over again, what are some of the key things that you think about?
Well, we harp on it, but if we don't know where we're headed, then any old road will take us there. So we want to think really specifically about those things that are most important so that we can align our wealth with our values. So a few examples, that we would see oftentimes clients as they move through. You talked about clients that will work a little bit longer. We have a number of different clients that have been on the 2-year retirement plan for the last 10 years. They just keep saying, I'm going to be retiring in 2 years. And they're enjoying what they're doing. So it's great, keep working. But what happens on the flip side sometimes is that those clients won't adjust maybe their lifestyle or their set of goals to the fact that maybe they've got another $1 million here that they've earned over the last 10 years or $2 million or some other number that's really substantial to the financial plan. So updating and saying, okay, well, do I want to pass those resources on more quickly, or do I want to have a greater legacy gift or other kinds of decisions that can be made now that the plan has shifted are really important to surface. Another would be, we see clients that have health events that come up that really shift the opportunity set that they might have. We see clients that have a sudden change in work the opposite direction, where they're not enjoying work, and we've already identified in the plan that they can retire or they can shift into something else. So we need to be cognizant that as these changes happen, whether they are large or small, we want to update the financial picture and also make informed choices based on what we see.
Right. Because if you guys remember, all of the financial plan comes back to what are those goals?
Yeah.
And if goals change, if life circumstances change, then goals change, which means everything about the plan changes. Where we're structuring investments changes, where we are maybe pushing funds, where we're pulling funds. Everything comes back to this financial plan. So it's really critical that we don't just set it and then in 30 years come back to it. It's something we have to come back to regularly with our clients.
Well, and one of the other things that we oftentimes will see is we'll sit down with clients a couple of years before their intended retirement, and they might still be paying off a home. They might still be putting kids through school. There might be other expenses that are there, and suddenly they get to a point where they say, okay, all of those expenses are gone, even to a greater extent than what I realized. Now I'm living fairly simply. Do I need to continue on this path? So there's other things that sometimes there isn't even a big life event that changes. It's just we get 2 years, 3 years down the road and we start to say, oh, I'm living a lot more simply maybe than I ever thought I would at this point.
Yeah.
Life's a lot less expensive. I've got more latitude.
Yeah. Okay, so as we actually think about the nuts and bolts of updating a financial plan, what are some of those key elements that we review regularly?
Well, what we always want to come back to first, again, are the key life goals. And then we're looking at all the different financial components, the income stream that clients have, be that their work or Social Security or other types of income like pension, or if they have real estate or other kinds of things. We want to update those pieces. We also want to update the other side of the ledger when we look at the expenses and what's going out. Are there big changes? Sometimes we'll have clients that they actually make a change as they get towards retirement in their home. They might be simplifying their home, or they might be adding a vacation home to the mix. Those have implications as well. So we want to look at the outgo in terms of spending. And then we want to, of course, understand where are the assets and how are they positioned and what can we expect over time as we put together some projections, some hypothetical situations there. So we're updating each one of those different pieces in kind, again, starting with life planning, then moving over to the financial plan and making sure that that's right where it needs to be.
Right. Well, and why this is so critical too, if you think about some of those last videos that we did about long-term care, the reality is if you're not updating your financial plan, then you may not understand how you can afford long-term care or how it actually affects your plan. So coming back to those things, whether, again, like you said, whether it's a big event, a small event, or, as clients age, we've talked about living gets a little bit simpler over time. Clients aren't traveling as much in their late 80s as they did maybe in their early retirement. So we got to start thinking, okay, well, because you're not doing the same amount of living, or you're doing more, or you're adding that vacation home, okay, what do we need to do to adjust to make sure that you're still on track?
Absolutely.
So after we've kind of taken some of that review, we've made some of the changes, what's next?
Well, I think what we want to do here is we also want to look at how we've positioned resources over time, and if we need to update those investment assets and where we have them. We might have been in a posture where we were being more aggressive leading up to a point where now clients have all that they need for retirement, and we want to be a little bit more conservative in our posture. Or if we have something that is different fundamentally in the plan, like a health event could come up, and now we say, okay, well, our life expectancy changes and we have a shorter time window to do some of these things. We need to be more aggressive in taking those trips, enjoying the different season of life. And so we might need to accelerate distributions, which could mean that we need to have less in growth or more aggressive investments and more in more conservative investments, just as an example. One of the other directions, though, that things could go is that we realize that we don't need as much, and we've got more that we're positioning longer term, maybe for legacy goals to be able to pass down to children or grandchildren or other charitable institutions down in the future. In that set of circumstances, we could say, well, do we want to be more aggressive with those resources? So there are, believe it or not, some clients that they become more aggressive as they get into their 80s because they say, I've got all that I need from Social Security and pension and a handful of other types of investments that are already covered in certain accounts. And I'm going to be very aggressive now, longer term thinking with these other assets because I'm not going to use them in my lifetime. So that can play both ways as we update an investment portfolio. Many times clients will say, well, we're expecting that we're going to get more conservative as we age. That is the case for a lot of folks, but for some folks, it's actually the opposite because they realize that they've done the things that they want to do. They've taken the trips, they've had the experiences, they've owned the different pieces, and now their goal is either gifting in the near term or gifting in the long term. And as they do that, sometimes that realigns the portfolio.
Right. Which is really helpful to think about because oftentimes when you think about, investing your 401k in your working years, you want it to just you want it to grow as you're working and then get more conservative towards the end of your working years. It doesn't make sense to go incredibly more growth oriented if you're about to retire. You want to make sure you have some on the sidelines so that you can withdraw some. Similarly, it can seem counterintuitive to say, okay, now I'm nearing the end of life and it's time to get more aggressive.
Yeah.
And so that's why coming back to these goals, okay, what are those legacy gifts? What are those lifetime inter vivos gifts that you want to be making? And making sure that your investments align with those goals. Like, again, it comes back over and over and over again. That's really important to think about. Okay, so we want to think about things we want to avoid. So we've talked about just the importance of coming back to our goals. What's one of the key things that we want to avoid when we think about updating a financial plan?
Well, I think we want to avoid anchoring too much on where we've been with our life plan. So if we said, okay, I want to be able to take these trips and I want to be able to make these particular gifts. Well, those are wonderful until something happens that really needs to adjust that plan. And oftentimes clients will vocalize that the life goal changes. So maybe they're not able to do those pieces anymore because they've had a health event and they want to focus on something else. But sometimes the financial plan doesn't get updated from there because there's this anchoring element that clients may have difficulty just psychologically, emotionally making that transition. So we don't want to anchor too much to what we've had in the past. Now, oftentimes if we review the life plan with clients from year to year and not too much has changed, we can actually see an opportunity to encourage towards some of those things that might be goals that really weren't exercised or weren't done in that particular year, and it can be wonderful. But if there are big changes, we also don't want to anchor to those and keep the plan in place for distributions at a particular pace and say, well, I can't take another $20,000 or $30,000 this year because the plan was that I wasn't going to do that I was going to have it, for the future. Well, if it's within the context of the updated plan, that you could take that trip, now that you've had this health event, you want to be able to focus on it now, then we don't want to say, I can't, just because it wasn't something that we had scripted a year ago or 2 years ago.
Right. Well, and I think that comes back to some of the challenge of financial decisions are emotional and they're weighty. And so some of this anchoring and some of these key things we want to avoid are just the reality that when we're dealing with money and our life savings, there's going to be high emotions. And so being willing to update this financial plan means there needs to be some emotional flexibility too that can be really hard to adjust to. So that's really good to remember. What's another one of those key things we want to avoid?
Well, neglect. And of course, because we're talking about it and because a client is engaging in the process, they're not neglecting that process typically. But if we shelve that for too long and we don't update it, we don't revisit it, then sometimes that path that we're headed on really isn't the right path. There's a deviation to where we need to really be headed there. So updating that at least annually, but usually a couple of times a year as clients are in retirement, is what we found is to be a helpful cadence.
Yeah. Okay, and that last one is just the feelings of being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Some major life event, you lose a spouse, you lose a job, a marriage dissolves. These are really intense and it can leave clients feeling overwhelmed. So walk us through why it's so important, even in the midst of seasons of being overwhelmed, to engage this life planning process.
Well, I think it's important in the midst of that to at least know where we're at on this journey. Sometimes we just need to hit pause and we need to let the grief wash over us. We need to engage in that moment. We don't necessarily need to change things around too much with our financial planning or our life planning, but we need to recognize that there are some big shifts that are happening. So whether that's in 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, we need to be able to do a complete review of that life plan and really re-script, all of it. Basically, when we have one of those big life events that happens. And that's not the easiest thing to do, but we need to understand that it's not necessarily something that we've got to do immediately, but we've got to do sometime in the near future.
Well, Spencer, thanks for walking us through, again, just that importance of updating our financial plan as life changes and as we change as people. So clients, if you have had a life circumstance that needs to update your financial plan, we would love to talk with you about it. As always, feel free to reach out to our team. We would love to talk with you more. If you like these financial planning videos, please share it with a friend. And if you have questions, go to our website at SeriousRetirement.com. This content was provided by Retirement Planning Services. We are located in Knoxville, Tennessee. You can visit our website at SeriousRetirement.com. The information in this recording is intended for general educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advisory, financial planning, legal, tax, or other professional advice based on your specific situation. Please consult with your professional advisor before taking any action based on its contents. Advisory services offered through Retirement Planning Services, LLC.